For those of you who only play PC games, it's time to introduce yourselves to a developer called Platinum. Platinum is a Japanese studio that makes silly games, and while Metal Gear Rising is the first Metal Gear game in 10 years to have a PC port, I'm actually more excited about it being the first Platinum game to have a PC port. See, the people responsible for Bayonetta are ex-Clover developers who were also responsible for God Hand and Beautiful Joe. They make some of the best beat-em-up action games in the business, and the PC hasn't really been a viable platform for that stuff. Capcom does a generally good job with PC ports, but it's about time that another Japanese developer gave it a shot. I really like the thought of Platinum's games coming out on PC, partly because on PC you have more assurance for a high frame rate and a cheap cost, and partly because no one gets to walk in on you while something like this is happening in the living room. I feel awfully ashamed to say it, but Platinum games are the kind of childish, guilty pleasure that I'd like to keep to myself. They are unapologetically gamey, they're completely indulgent in the dumb, lowbrow spectacle that is the classic Japanese video game. And unlike the overt outrageousness of your Saints Rows and your dive kicks, there's an innocence to the Platinum games. They're not foul-mouthed, cynical, and vulgar. They don't have to crack jokes to make you laugh. The humor comes from their confidence and their campiness. They're enjoyably silly because they're honest explorations of the silliness of video games themselves. You can really see the developer's inner child come out in these games. They depict what you were thinking when you were slapping action figures together as a kid. They're perverse and they're naive. They're totally childish video games, and they are very honest and aware of that. And Metal Gear Rising fits right into their lineup. I know that this is a divisive title for Metal Gear fans, but I like to think of it as more of a Platinum game than a Metal Gear Solid game. After all, the name is different, the gameplay is different, most of the characters and story are different, the developer is different, the writers and producers are a bit different, and though Kojima's name is stamped all over it, his interviews seem to suggest that he didn't have that much to do with it. But since the developers involved with it were qualified, and since they did make a good game, I am okay with all of that. But it's divisive. It's a Platinum game, so things are gonna get pretty stupid. But since it's a Platinum game, there's a really endearing quality to that stupidity. Like how all the villains make these dumb faces, and how adorably hard it tries to make Raiden look cool, and how incredibly overacted the story scenes are.
You've lost your mind.
But first you need to take a dump.
I guess the one thing that surprised me most was how all of this could be viewed as a comedy. The tone is light and campy, and a few scenes are genuinely hilarious. It looks like Platinum's goal was, after all, not to make an honest attempt at a Metal Gear Solid game, but rather to make an underplayed parody of the Metal Gear Solid aesthetic. And to be honest, you don't have to stretch Metal Gear very far to turn it into a parody. Anyways, the direction and writing here mostly work, but it gets really awkward when it tries to cross over with real-life events to an even further extent than Metal Gear Solid itself does. And it might be because the game is getting schizophrenic within its mishmash of comedy and drama. Its weaker moments are also those where it does attempt Metal Gear Solid-style preachiness, but does it with such little subtlety and restraint that it comes off as patronizing. I was handling it pretty well up until the final boss, who was showing off South Park levels of juvenile, ill-informed political commentary, and honestly, I didn't expect or want that, but I do understand that it comes with the territory. I guess trying to be all preachy like Metal Gear and also being all over the top and crazy like a Platinum game isn't the wisest of combinations. That doesn't mean that it's not very entertaining though. You'll see these characters do their theatrical, cringy monologues, and then some fake Dragon Force will rip up and something stupid will happen, and that will make everything okay.
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
The music is a great testament to how this game can look so kitschy and dumb while not looking lazy or exploitive. The music is loud, overproduced, nu metal, adolescent goth boy schlock. It sounds like the bastard child of Linkin Park, and Evanescence is sticking his fingers into an electrical outlet, and it actually works! It works so well! This music fits the picture on the screen, it fits the speed and the pacing of the gameplay, and it fits the style and the tone of the game's overall aesthetics. And for game music, all of that is what really should matter. The cohesion of all those aesthetic elements with the gameplay works. And while I really enjoy this game, I am willing to admit that it's not Platinum's best, and that it does have some questionable design decisions. Most questionable is how the camera works. It automatically centers onto Raiden's backside every time you move, which makes sense because Raiden moves very fast, and during fights you'll be zigzagging back and forth between multiple enemies from multiple angles. Unfortunately, this has the nasty side effect of making it difficult to track unaware enemies while moving slower. Since you'll be doing that, you have a lot of optional light stealth at your fingertips. It's also weird that Raiden's moveset has no projectile attacks. On one hand, it's ridiculous that futuristic 21st century combat favors swords rather than guns, but I can give that the benefit of the doubt for gameplay reasons. But they decided to put flying enemies in it. The projectile weapons you do have are optional and extremely limited. They're too slow to catch up to these guys, and all that makes every encounter with this one flying common enemy very awkward, and I bet the game would have been better off without this guy. It just seems like for a game all about speed and precision, Raiden is a bit clumsy to control. Your analog stick gives you two speeds of movement, a really fast run or a really slow walk, and that walk is simply too slow to be practical for the included stealth options. The R trigger activates Ninja Run, which automates jumping, and that means that sometimes you're going to see your guy decide to jump or not jump in a way you don't want him to. And the parrying system is another divisive topic. I actually love the way it plays out, but what I do have an issue with is how your defensive moves share the same button as your attack moves. And this is obviously a deliberate choice. You have no passive defend button or dodge button, but instead use the light attack plus movement buttons to activate a parry during a contextual flash. It ends up giving the game a distinct sense of movement and vulnerability that ultimately might have been worth the sacrifice, but it still doesn't feel elegant. It means that pulling off that basic and necessary parry is left up to a finicky contextual prompt, and it also means that parrying uses the same buttons as attacking, so sometimes you end up accidentally parrying when you meant to attack, or vice versa. On harder modes, you learn to attack without the movement stick, but learning that feels more like you're compromising for a wonky system rather than learning a gratifying new skill. Raiden's attacks are usually faster than those he's parrying, and to get those high scores, you gotta rack up high combos that are gonna be full of light attacks that share that same button as the parry. So, it's not Platinum's most polished slasher, and Raiden's limited moveset comes nowhere close to, say, Bayonetta's seemingly endless combo list. It's also certainly not their hardest game. Getting used to the parrying system will take some time, but until then the game is very generous about healing you. All the bosses drop health packs during the fight, and you can also grab an instant heal from nearly every enemy in the game. But the move that gets you there is the backbone of the combat system. Raiden's default moveset is full of weak, narrow slices that deal out minor chip damage, but they're designed to open up individual enemies to blade mode, where you manually aim and slice a fatal blow after landing some hits to fill up the associated meter. For the tougher enemies, you can beat them to a pulp with your normals, but you're gonna save a lot of time and trouble by cycling through the various QTEs opened up by hitting that blade mode. That is why there's an insta-heal health pack inside most of the enemies. It acknowledges the high damage and light defense facing the player, and it counters it by incentivizing the use of blade mode. Like any good hack and slash game, it's a system that doesn't just ask you to defeat the enemies and reach the end of the level, but to perform well on your way there. The scoring system is currency for buying upgrades in between missions, and they can be very, very expensive, so you want to be chasing after those S ranks. That also incentivizes New Game Plus replays and harder modes. It even incentivizes shorter restarts where you can replay individual fights over and over again until you pull them off perfectly. Since I wanted to do this and didn't feel I had to, that probably means the game's doing something right. So despite a few specific nitpicks with the camera and the moves, this game does its thing very well. It's gratifying, shameless, childish fun, and you might not find a more classically entertaining game for this low price. The PC version includes all the console DLC, which is kind of a double-edged sword, since Metal Gear Rising is not a game that did DLC right. The Fox Blade is a kind of overpowered cheat item, and it's not out of reach for your first playthrough. The VR missions are nice, but the two other included DLC missions feel a lot more half-assed. Performance is great though, and there's even an option to overkill the blade mode physics. Keyboard and mouse controls are there, and they're totally playable, but you're gonna get much better results from a gamepad. But the game does lack a lot of resolution options. A few important 16:10 resolutions are nowhere to be found, as well as anything higher than 1080p. Which is a shame, but ultimately this PC version ended up okay. It's not the best port job out there, but it's acceptable. And I, for one, am very grateful for that. This is one of the best action games of last year, and it represents what I'd like to see companies do with old franchises. If Konami is really going to be dragging out Metal Gear for this long, I'd like to see them go for more creative spin-offs that try something new, rather than try to keep up with the unrealistic expectations set by a 28-year-old series. And Metal Gear Rising did it right. It's very distanced from the main series, and it also takes place during a part of the timeline that fans probably care the least about. In a way, it's less offensive than sequels like Peace Walker and even MGS4 were, to a certain degree. And also consider that the character of Raiden himself was created as a kind of personification of a game's conflict between selfishly pleasing the player while also contextualizing that selfishness, and that's kind of what this story is about too, even as slopshod as it is. I guess what I mean to say is that if they were ever going to make some kind of ridiculous Metal Gear spin-off, this is the time, place, and character to do it with. Metal Gear Rising may be dumb as hell, but it was created by a very smart and talented developer who made some wise decisions with the franchise. Like Platinum's other games, it's a nostalgic homage to the more primitive thrills of video games, which is just a facade for the complex and gratifying gameplay underneath. The pure, sweet childhood thrills of entertainment and fun is everything this game has to offer. On the other hand, most games from last year were trying to be all self-critical and depressing, so it's a refreshing break from all that. And now that a PC version is released and that its price has been cut in half across all 3 platforms, it's a great time to check it out.